reintroduce myself again. I'm going to be co-moderating tonight, but my name is Kate Freer, as I mentioned, she, her, zooming in from Muskogee Creek lands. I am a member of Wingspace and the Salons Committee. I am also a multimedia designer, a filmmaker, an educator, an organizer, a constant student, and just so thrilled to be here sharing space with these amazing artists, theater makers, storytellers, innovators, all of the things, and to really dig into this critical conversation and to, yeah, just appreciation and gratitude. I'm going to, oh, and I'll also, I'm going to hand it over to Kate Heaney, and also inviting our dear friend Tracy, if you would like to join us in this virtual grid. You are very invited as well.
Thank you so much, Kate Freer. I'm Kate Heaney. I use she, her pronouns. I'm calling from Lenape land in Hackensack in what's colonially known as New Jersey. And I am one of the steering committee members at MENATMA, which is the Middle Eastern North African Theater Makers Alliance, along with some other folks on this call, Tracy and I think others. And really grateful to the folks at Wingspace for reaching out and making this happen and making this space for this conversation. Before I turn it over to our panelists, I want to just quickly mention a little bit about MENATMA's mission and a little bit about our upcoming convening, which is starting tomorrow evening. So for those who don't know, so the MENA Theater Makers Alliance amplifies the voices of Middle Eastern and North African theater makers and expands how stories from and about our communities are told on U.S. stages. We take space, make opportunities, champion artists, and build relationships with other marginalized communities and allies to build a more vibrant American theater. And I'll add our mission to the chat along with our website. Starting tomorrow evening, we have a convening coming up. There will be a series of panels of discussion. There will be an open mic with MENA and SWANA artists. It's all virtual and it's all free. So really encourage folks to join us. Again, I'll pop the link in the chat. And if you have any questions, let us know. But without further ado, I will turn it over to our esteemed panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Dina. You want to take it away?
Hi, my name is Dina El-Aziz. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a costume designer. I'm currently zooming in from, I guess, known as the land of the Lenape, but colloquially known as Princeton. Do I hand it over to someone else? I don't know.
Hi all, my name is Rana, Esfandiary. I use she, her, hers, and I am zooming from the land of several tribal nations, including Kaw, Osage, and Lenape, known as Kansas. And I'm a scenographer, and I'm so happy to be here. And I'm gonna pass it to Maamoun.
Hello everyone, I'm Maamoun. I'm zooming from the land of the Lenape, colonially known as Brooklyn. And I'm a Lebanese set designer. I work as a set designer in the United States, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you all. I wonder if we could also take this time during our sort of like opening of the space, if you would each talk a little bit about your process and your practice and your sort of journey into this work. And we can go in the same order that we just did the check-in. So I'm going to hand it back over to Dina.
Great, thank you. So I guess mine was a bit of a long and short journey, if that makes sense. I'm British Egyptian, so I grew up in the UK, but then I moved to Egypt when I was 18. And I hadn't really considered costume design. I thought, oh, maybe I'm into fashion, who knows? And then I went to the American University in Cairo, and my second semester there, I decided to be an art major. and the teacher was also the costume designer for the theater department. So that's kind of how I ended up interested in costume design, because I was like, well, I'm not really interested in fashion, but I do like telling stories with clothing. So then I like worked my way up from stuff backstage, assistant, designer, and my teachers encouraged me to apply for grad school, and I ended up at NYU, thankfully, and I've been here ever since. I graduated when 2015, so I'm a working professional here since then, and yeah, just loving it. I think it was, I could talk further in detail, but I sort of found my niche in Manasa sort of theater making, and that from that it sort of expanded my other projects. But I can hand it over to the next person to tell their journey so far.
Sure, thank you. So I'm from Iran, born and raised in Iran. And I moved to the United States around 2010. And I studied scenography here at the University of Kansas. And then I decided to do PhD because I was just interested in doing research. And at that time, I started to focus on MENA region. And my research is specifically focused on MENA countries, especially Iran. And I took like 5 years off from designing. And in 2017, I went back to it. And since then I'm designing like scenery, costume, not that much lighting. So my preference is scenery and costume. And then through ATHA, I got to know this amazing scholars and artists all focused on MENA, and it just opened the whole new world to me. And I just could talk about stuff that I was interested in with a group of people that they were sharing same concern. And and that's how I'm here. Since then, I'm currently teaching at the University of Kansas. So yeah, I'm gonna pass it to the next person.
So I moved to New York 5 years ago. I moved, like if I want to talk about my journey now, I feel like I'm in constant change. So like I do not define myself with the things I do. I use the opportunities that are available to create, because I like to create as an artist. I work as a set designer. My journey started as an architect, and I used to be bored working in offices, and I decided to start acting. So acting was the introduction to theater. And then I was like, how can I merge both? And NYU showed up to me, and I ended up doing set design. But while I was at school, I was like studying theater from the architect point of view, the storyteller, and like many perspectives. But as well in the healing spaces that theater can create, because it healed me, my personal story, growing up in Lebanon. So now I feel like my purpose in life is to create theater that heals. But I work as a set designer to gain resources so I can make my vision happen. And this is how I would define myself at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all thank you all so much for sharing that and a little bit about your journey to this moment. I'd also be curious to hear how your experience of theater has changed over the past 2 years and this time that we've just that we're still going through.
I guess it's a little difficult because we had this giant like pause, which was the pandemic, that sort of just stopped our progress for a good year and a bit. But I guess I could talk about leading up to that and where I've continued on since starting work again. I guess for me it was like sort of a slow progress. Started off doing all these little shows for the MENA community, and as I kept doing that, you know, word of mouth like and reputation sort of spread, and I started getting bigger and bigger shows and started working regionally. Especially when there's this sort of new culture of like trying to get people of the heritage of the shows that you're designing. And there are just not that many MENA or Manasa designers out there. And costume designers are usually like quick and easy dramaturgs for a lot of these shows. I'm not necessarily saying I agree with that. I think there should be dramaturgs and experts and things like that on the shows, but I guess theater is still sort of catching up to that, you know, whatever it is they're trying to figure out. And then, like I said, just grows and grows and grows. The more regional credits I get, the more people start to notice me in bigger venues in New York. And also, like, I've also been trying to give back to the community that sort of like lifted me up by still doing the smaller shows, even, you know, if it's not necessarily to the same scale. Like, I just want to support the community that supported me. So that's sort of where I am at the moment. I found with, I suppose, the cultural reset that sort of happened during the pandemic, there is definitely more and more doors opening. But still, I think we have a little bit of a ways to go.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I'm curious if other folks have thoughts on that question for the past 2 years. Yeah, go for it.
Sure, I can talk about that a little bit. Well, in Kansas, I think the situation is a little bit different from like bigger metropolitan cities. It's like the diversity is not that obvious here. So our shows are mostly put on stage for dominantly white audiences, and it is kind of, for me, it is a learning opportunity to get into knowing the culture that I'm not familiar with. And I think in terms of like MENA community, I'm not that much in touch with the community in Kansas because it's not a big community. So I'm trying to be in touch with people through ATHA or here and just learn about their works and how they're doing what they're doing. But personally, I think within the past 2 years, I just learned to be a better listener as a designer, and just try to bring in my own perspective whenever it is possible, even if the shows are written by white playwrights, mostly for white audiences. So I think kind of like a battle is different here in Kansas, which I'm enjoying it. So yeah.
I had a very specific story because I graduated from NYU 2020. So technically my thesis was packing my stuff home and like figuring out how I'm graduating. So I did not have like the usual experience of like the American theater in New York or like the theater in the United States. I worked as an assistant during COVID, like for small projects. But I think it was more for me like an awakening phase to theater in the United States, but as well the choice of stories we say here, like people wants to hear here, but as well what's happening back home, because home, there's a revolution and then the bomb in August 2020. So this awakening to like different scale and different stories happening at the same time, and COVID made me realize that theater for me is dead. So like I'm a little bit like radical now, but this is how I think about it. I think it is dead, and everything we're trying to do, all of us, is revive it, like recreate it, to bring it back to life, choosing the stories and what to tell. And I feel like today despite the race or genders, because I do not believe in how the energies manifest in the world. I believe in like we're all one. There's no difference. So I think that COVID and the past 2 years made me realize that theater is just a representation of the world we live in. It's like it's a space we save moments and experiences, and they're saved in the archive of history of telling stories. And more than everything, we're shifting from an era to another, and I feel it's important to choose wisely the stories we want to give our children. And this is how I think about theater. Like, I think this is what the past 2 years made me realize. And now I'm here, you know, like waiting to see how and what stories will be here to be told. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I wanted to just follow up with that, and something that you all have touched on a bit, to just, you know, with this huge shift in culture and the culture of theater, hopefully, but also like the attention that is being paid to intentionally changing the culture of theater as it has existed in the past as a predominantly white, centered, European-centered space of like very specific classics, very specific ways of working, very specific people being hired for, and a really intense hierarchy inside of all of that. There are many people that are pushing for change, and I have heard all of you speak to that a bit in like what has changed for you in your personal process and practice. And so I'm curious about like inside of that change, like has what's been asked of you changed, and have your priorities changed, and the way that you collaborate and what you expect of your collaborators in the space that host you, like what has changed in that sort of reciprocal relationship of storytelling and art making and theater making? And I'll just put it to the room, and feel free to unsilence as you feel moved to.
I'm gonna say I'm gonna be really candid about it. Definitely. So when I was in grad school, and I don't blame them because they didn't really know at the time, and I also didn't know better, but there was a huge emphasis on, well, who's your audience? What's your audience gonna think? And that was low-key veiled assumption that your audience is gonna be white, no one's gonna know. So when I was there, I kept challenging this idea of the audience is never gonna know. So their sort of assumption was that you have to dilute whatever culture you're representing in order for a white American audience to understand what's happening. But in doing so, you misrepresent the culture. So since graduating, my sort of method of design has been to design as if somebody from that particular culture is going to see themselves represented accurately on stage. You know, that's what you should think of when you think of, well, who's the audience? It shouldn't be like, is the audience going to understand? Because, like, to be fair, Hollywood doesn't do this, and Hollywood movies go around the world. We all grew up watching American television, and nobody sat there and dumbed down American TV for the foreigners. Like, I think that idea occurred to me when one sort of white playwright said, I'm just trying to make Afghanistan more relatable to an American audience. And I clapped back with, well, why, when Americans don't do that for the rest of the world? So it's always like challenging this notion of like centering whiteness as the universal. You know, if a story is told right, and these were my teachers from undergrad who would come to watch Arabic shows, even though they didn't understand Arabic and they were American, they would say, if the story is done right, you can understand it. And I think that that is true. If it's told well, you don't need to dumb it down. It's about representing people accurately. It's not about like dumbing it down or diluting for a specific audience. It's just a thing that like hits a nerve for me because I struggled with that a lot in grad school. And I think I'm sort of more of a shy person, but I think as I've done this more and more, and as I've sort of like built a solid reputation of work behind me, I can sort of like call these things out more. And I think that's what that requires. Like, I can't be complicit in, you know, dumbing it down for people anymore. I have to be like, no, these people need it to be told this way. So yeah, I think I had more to say, but will get back to me, I guess. Anyone else want to chime in?
I mean, Dina, I kind of agree with you. And I think I learned it through one of my professors who used to tell me, I mean, from another point of view, because he used to tell me, do not underestimate your audiences and do not think that you need to dumb down or water down things for them, because they're going to get it. And that's, I think it's the biggest, one of the biggest takeaway from my graduate school, because we should not make assumption about who is watching the show and from where they are coming into this space. And yeah, about calling out, yeah, as we are getting more experience, I have started to say like the problematic plays or assumptions about especially Middle Eastern countries, because it's very stigmatized culture here. So yes, I agree with you. With the right representation, we do not need to kind of, you know, dumb it down for anyone. And to answer the question about what has changed priorities, I think when I was younger, and I'm still not that old, so I don't want to misrepresent myself, but sometimes I felt like the design is the, you know, center of the production. But right now I am stepping away from that assumption that it is not a show about my set. It is a show that tells a story, and people are coming into the space with different perspectives, and they're bringing different opinions to just try to help telling the story. And my set is just one tiny element in this universe. So I'm definitely, this is something that I think I have changed in my way of collaborating. To care more about stories and perspective and experiences that are coming to share the space, rather than the aesthetic as a center of that universe.
Thank you, Dina and Rana, because you're like putting me in the in the context. So I personally like. Did not have a lot of experience working with plays that are related to the MENA or like any like the immigrant experience. I only had the opportunity to work on plays that were mainly in the African American culture and what's happening now in the US. I personally relate to every story of suffering. So I did not like, I never had the situation or the experience that Rana and Dina had. So I'm excited, like I'm actually excited to see what comes in and how I would act within the experience. But I feel like I definitely understand, like as an assistant, like what I'm gonna ask the theater that I'm working with. I would like to have the opportunity to be part of a project that does not have any relation to my ethnicity, but as well projects that has, because I can bring into it stuff. I think I learned now that when I collaborate with people, it's not about showing the other my perspective or what I've understood from the story or how I see it. I learned more about keeping this keeping the story or the design when we work on the project open for interpretation and open for curiosities to understand. So I used to think more about like, I need to tell the message. And now I'm like, no, I just need to give the curiosity to find the message. I expect, I would like, I am someone that is #1 fan of experimental theater and how to actually tell stories that are happening at the moment through body movement. So I'm excited to see how American theater would accommodate a new theater that is not proscenium based or like based on like the traditional way of like designing a set. It could be more ritualistic. It could be more like for releasing trauma from the body and inviting the audience to be part of it. So I'm curious to see how we're gonna evolve into the new theater. So yeah, this is where I think I'm at.
Thank you all. Yeah, also just lifting up with what Catherine Curry wrote in the chat, this idea of open for curiosity. I love this idea of giving of guiding audiences to the curiosity to find the message. That's beautiful. So I want to follow up on something that some of you touched on, this idea of, or I think specifically Dina was speaking about this idea of feeling like, you know, one must water down something for a certain audience and sort of pushing against that. And I'm curious, what are the benefits of creating a space or a piece with others that do share a common affinity or identity? And then on the flip side of that, what do you do when you're creating a show that's about a particular identity, whether it's yours or not, for an audience that you know doesn't hold a similar experience? Yeah, and I'd be curious for each of you if you have any insights on that or anecdotes to share.
I mean, I think it's important to basically set the standard. If you work within a certain way, and the assumption being that everybody should feel accurately represented, like, I think that's the goal. And if you do that within specific niche communities, you know, you can do that with every piece you work on. You know, specifically for period pieces, like maybe the audience doesn't understand period pieces exactly, but you know, when you kind of know when something's off. That's the same with, you know, representing other cultures or other communities. You don't know what it is, but at the back of your head, you know, something's a little bit not accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, what was the other question?
Thinking about like, what's the for you, what is the benefit of creating a space with others that share a common affinity, or like working in concert with those folks?
I think you hold each other accountable, you know, for making sure things are accurate when you work within your community, but also you discover some like preconceived notions that you have about your own community as well, as sometimes I find. And at the same time, there's like a shortcut to everything. You don't always have to explain. You don't feel othered when you're working with like-minded peers or people from your community. And even if you work with people who aren't, you know, it's about like making sure everybody is at this sort of level, rather than like, this is the standard of American theater and everyone else who's not at that, you know, white American whatever is like down here, if that makes sense. You know, we want to make it so everybody, there isn't an over explanation of the non-common cultures, if that makes sense. Just getting it into practice is my opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, and I can build on what Dina said. And one thing, and it is coming from my own experience about the show that we are gonna put on our stage, The Devil Between Us by Sharifa Yasmin. One thing that I noticed, and it has nothing to do with the majority of white audiences that we have, it's just, you know, Muslims, they have there are diversity of practices even among Muslims. So even we cannot like, dumb it down to one practice. And I think this is very important to show that there are diversity of practices, and even Muslims, they're not all the same. And in my conversation with someone, we hit the point that that person was saying, if this person wears hijab, it means that person is conservative. And I was like, no, this is like a very stereotypical representation of Muslim. And that person wasn't a white audience member. So I think when we put a show on our stage, especially about a stigmatized community, it's just so important, even for people from that community, to show that there is this diversity, and we should respect it. And we should not just insist that the way that I practice Islam is the only way. And I see it this way, and I grew up with it. So yeah, I think it's just as Dina said it, if the representation is accurate, and at the same time, it's not like very affirmative that this is the only way, I think with that, we have done justice to represent different communities, non-white communities on our stages.
This is a very like sensitive topic to me, because I'm still growing up as a Muslim man in Lebanon. When I moved to New York, in Lebanon, at the age of 12, I actually knew that I'm Muslim. And then at the age of 16, I knew that I realized that religion is sometimes a barrier in society. So I had like specific events. But when I moved here, I've realized that whenever I say I'm Muslim to people, they tell me, oh my God, you don't look like a Muslim. And I'm like, okay, whatever it means. And I've witnessed it as well in like collaboration in theater, where like I'm working with the other, and I had like, oh my, like I had this feeling of like, oh, like I don't get it how you're like so open, and you're from the Middle East, and like you're like from there. And I'm like, why is this related to this? Like, how can culture define consciousness? And this is where I still have the same encounters sometimes, where people's like, oh, we don't know, just tell us. And now I look at it as more like it's an opportunity to inform instead of like get emotional or sensitive about it. It's like, okay. And for me, this is how I think about like different races now. Like racism is like someone who doesn't know the other, and instead of like coming into fear, it's like, I don't know you, I fear you, and like create the differences. I'm like, oh, okay, it's an opportunity to meet each other. And this is how I feel like this is in a relationship, and it's translated in theater, but as well I feel like the storytelling, in the United States, the way we choose to tell the stories of MENA, of any marginalized community, it's always as if like it's how to say that, it's like as if to be better, I'm doing this, it's like for the good, I'm doing this, and just by talking from that voice, I'm putting myself in a privileged place compared to the other, and this is something that I always feel, and even the way we write the stories, and I feel like I don't have a solution, but I think it's a place where it's important to shed awareness to. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think that even just having these conversations and continuing to communicate with each other is part of a solution. And just uplifting a few things that were said is that creating art is an opportunity to meet each other. So beautiful. And also just what, Dina and Rana both said about having like the specifics of the experience inside of the work is that is actually more universally relatable and not like watering down anything. And I have found a lot of times when speaking to my peers and colleagues that a lot of the pedagogy of creating work to be ready to be a professional designer in the United States, one as a designer is asked to put aside their identity to create for a universal audience. And now that is not necessarily the global ask of theater makers. However, with that shift, you know, you might be asked to speak for your entire like group or race or religious group, and or maybe you are being asked directly or indirectly to be an expert or be combating unconscious bias or preconceived notions or unspoken expectations. So I'm curious, what do you feel are the unique challenges and strengths that you experience related to any of these intersecting identities that you hold?
I mean, I've always said it's sort of like a double-edged sword. Like, I want to be hired because of who I am, my background and my ethnicity and stuff like that, because I want to be in these rooms because I'm not in these rooms. But at the same time, like, I don't want you to just hire me for these shows. Like, I'm capable of doing other things. So it's like the pressure to make sure things are represented correctly within these communities. But at the same time, I'm like, I'm a superstar, I could do other things, you know? And I think the one thing that I sort of struggled with, and I guess, I don't know if it's just the equivalent of white privilege or like whatever, when people like say, oh, you just got the opportunity because of who you are. I really struggled with that. You know, opportunities were open to me because of who I was. And sometimes I was in the room and I was making a great impact, and sometimes I was just in the room, you know. And the more and more I do these things, the more I realize who are the people I want to work with, and the people that I want to work with are actually like invested in my storytelling. Or if I say something, they're not going to clap back with like, well, you know, we did our research. You know, so it's really just, it's hard. It's a lot of like feeling out who you're collaborating with. And yes, I got the opportunity because of who I am. Like, it opened the door for me, but my skills and my talent and stuff like that get me through the door. So don't be like me and like internalize it and be like, oh no, I'm not really good enough, I'm a fraud. Like, just do it, because less talented people have gotten further with more opportunities than you. And this is a competition, and everybody is like trying to get through. There should be more opportunities, but there aren't. So just take every opportunity you can. And also sort of like realized within the past year or so that I've like really marketed myself as a MENA designer, as an Egyptian designer, stuff like that. But I've still sort of like downplayed my Muslim identity. And I sort of like, so like I appreciate what Maamoun said. Because I don't think, I mean, people know that I am, but I don't think people jump to, I mean, I do get hired from Muslim shows, but if you know what I mean, like, it's not really like, it's weird when I think about how much I sort of downplayed it because of my upbringing and because it's like still such a stigmatized thing that I didn't really think about it until this very minute. Yeah, I'll hand it on to the next person.
Can I just say, I'm sorry, like that comment drives me nuts. It just infuriates me that you only got this show because of your identity. Like, fuck that. I'm sorry. Like, white people have been getting show, as somebody who is a white-bodied, white identified individual, like white people have been getting shows because of their identity for all of like, you know, contemporary and past theater. And so just to be like confronted with the idea that you know, might not be hired for something based on your identity, welcome. All right, so
yeah, I know, it's like welcome to my world. Like I had to watch mediocre like white people like get jobs that I could have easily done.
And also like until it like the like white people aren't getting all the jobs anymore, then there's
I mean, they're still getting them. Like
yeah,
the whole like, oh, you guys are just getting these jobs because of it. And it's like, well, no. And I see it still more in film. Like I get passed over for jobs all the time for quote unquote more experienced white people. And it's like, okay, well, how's a girl supposed to get through? And then like one director who hired someone over me, like even reached out to me a year later, was like, do you want to assist this person for free? And I'm like, how untalented or unskilled do you think I have to be to do that? So there's still this like subconscious thing of like one particular group getting the opportunities regardless, and it messes with your mind a little, but you just have to keep going is like my like what I'm trying to tell myself, you know.
I don't necessarily, Kate, think that I am forced to take on my universal identity in the United States, because I do not believe that the American theater is adopting the universal identity. I think they're adopting the U.S. identity or culture, the Constitution. So what I think I am personally going through understanding my voice as a Lebanese artist to my country itself and what's going through, but as well understanding the universality of what the human race needs at the moment and after COVID. So I think we all need to be grounded in a culture. Like I think it's important to be grounded in a culture. It's like habits and rituals. So I would like to work on the universal perspective. I would like to be in a project where we're not working on a cultures or like the meeting of many cultures or culture exchange or like stories about cultures. I want stories that transcended cultures and we moved into like the universal. And I don't necessarily think we've reached that space yet in theater.
I mean, sorry, I would argue that doesn't exist. Like,
Please, yeah.
Yeah, there's no way that exists. There's never going to be a universal, everybody's on the same page, because there's always going to be a dominant culture. You know, in my opinion, I could very well be wrong. Because how do you determine what's universal other than basic feelings, you know? But you can't like, there's no universal reactions to things or approaches, if that makes sense.
I agree with you. I don't think we can find something universal as an identity, but we can find the curiosity of finding something. So what's universal is everyone wants to know the truth. What's universal is everyone wants to experience something. So these are the universal languages, more like, if I'm clear what I'm trying to say, it's like adopting the universal process in a way, instead of like stories or like the subtexts in a way. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, sorry, it's not that I don't agree with it, but it's I'm a pessimist. Sorry, Maamoun.
Oh, this is great. I'm curious, Rana, if you have any thoughts about this or the other.
Sure, yeah. My experience has been like on the other side of the spectrum compared to Dina, because I was never I was never got a design gig because I was from Iran or because of my identity. And I just caught myself a couple of years ago with something that I thought I was pushed doing it in the US. And that was like immediately after saying I'm from Iran, I had to say, oh, I'm not practicing, like, you know, because I thought this is like important for people here to accept me as like not a radical person, Muslim. And I have stopped doing that because I saw no one else in the room go ahead and say they're practicing or they're not practicing. And I have noticed like Iranians or people or Muslims, they do it. They do it a lot when they are in a dominantly white spaces. Like they have to go ahead and say, hey, I'm not practicing, so I'm a liberal person. Don't be afraid of me. I'm not going to say anything radical. Yeah, it was fascinating to listen to Dina and the experience that she's having, because I'm just having the opposite of it because of the lack of MENA centered productions here in Kansas. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and thank you all just for like naming that like everybody's experience is very different, including everybody's experience of the pandemic and all like what is being asked of you, what is not being asked of you. And for this like, you know, very rich conversation about the idea of universal identity or universal concept. And, you know, I would just say that for myself, I'm like, wouldn't it be nice to have a show where everyone is able to show up with their full identity and in their full humanity, and that wasn't even questioned, that you just could. Yeah, Dina, I know that you have to run in a little bit. Do you have a little bit more time, or should I ask you this final question before?
Oh yeah, we can do the final question.
Yeah, so just as a preview question for our closing circle, Dina, before you leave, I'm curious if you know, speaking to other theater makers and artists in the community, if there was something that they could do or shift or change or know going forward, what would you ask of your peers and other artists or even audiences? Anyone? What's your what would be your ask or call to action?
Mine is a little bit more patience and opportunity for people that you might not necessarily think from the get-go are the right choice. You know, the only way someone's going to build up their portfolio is if you give them the opportunity. You know, yes, you might have a big show, but you can't just go back to the people that are not right for it, or the same people that you've been going to over and over again. The only way we can expand like our pool of resources is by like taking chances on people. And I think it's a very, very, very sort of like American thing that I've come across of like, you need the answer immediately or it's not good enough, or like there's not an acceptance of I don't know the answer right now, but I'll figure it out, or I don't have the skill just yet, but I'm working on it. You know, there's an expectation of being like up at this level from the get-go, but it's like people like me need to build up for it. People like me like struggled with, you know, acceptance from family of this chosen career. Like you don't know half the time the battle that somebody already went through just to get to that low point, you know, where they're going to move up. So the assumption that people can't grow or wouldn't benefit from this opportunity, even if they're shy, even if they're like timid or hesitant, you know, you can unlearn these things. So I would challenge people to just take more chances, especially if it's like
hello people who are
God, Mike. It's the beauty of live theater and performance. Anything can happen.
I feel like we're about to attend this dress rehearsal with you.
Okay, it stopped. So that's that's sort of my cue to go because I have half hour. But yeah, take chances on people, give them opportunities. Somebody give me a better job in film, like, give me that Broadway show. Come on, I can do it, I'm tired of being like, oh, I can't do it because I don't have the experience. Well, like, when am I going to get it? Somebody give it to me and we'll leave it at that, So I highly doubt I will fall flat on my face, so give it. And on that note, I will head out. Thank you for having me. It was really great to talk to everyone and see familiar and unfamiliar faces. Best of luck to everybody.
Thank you
Thank
so,
you,
so,
Dina.
so much, and happy dress.
Thank you.
Happy half hour.
Bye, Dina. Thank you. All right, so we
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, sorry. Are we answering the same question?
No, that was just a preview. I wanted Dina to be able to answer the question before she left. I think Kate has another question for the group.
Yeah,
But we
yeah, I was
will
gonna
circle
say-
back to it. So think about what your charge is for your peers.
Yes. So just shifting gears a little bit, I'm curious to know from both of you, what do you feel is most central to your collaborative process? And when you look for collaborators, what are the values that you focus in on? Values, artistic or otherwise, and has that evolved or changed for you over time?
Sure, I can jump in. For me, it's just communication and people just come into the space with an open mind, that this is theater, this is a journey, things gonna change, perspectives gonna get shifted. So be open-minded and ready to have conversation. And I always enjoyed when, I could have like a very low-key conversation with the director, with the rest of the design team or the dramaturg. And so the open line is really important to me. And sometimes I'm just like, itching to get challenged for someone just to keep telling me, have you ever thought about this? Have you ever thought about that? So, just pushing each other to put the best version of what we can come up with on stage, and to learn something, grow, and then move on. I think that's the most important thing for me.
Thank you, Rana. That's beautiful. For me, what's important now is actually the power dynamic. I do not like to feel power dynamic. Genuinely, it's like, and what I mean by that is that to meet the other in an equal place, like when we're creating a project together, it's like as if we're like two children playing together. And I feel that sometimes in projects, I feel like there's the age gap, there's the way you come from. There's so many differences that gives the other the opportunity to take the position of the dominant. And to me, this is what turns me off. I feel that I cannot be fully expressive and it closes me off. So this is something that I work consciously on communicating, so I don't find myself in that space. I personally feel that I would like as well to feel that in the room, we don't have to know. Like, we always come in a project with like, oh, you didn't know the history, you didn't know this, you don't know this. And I feel like if we come in a space where, let's say no one knows, and let's research, let's figure out. I feel this helps me more in finding a place of collaboration instead of like who knows more than the other or who's teaching the other. And yeah, there's a lot, there's a big list for me on this topic. So, but mostly now what I look for collaborators is someone that not necessarily tells me yes to the ideas that I'm saying, but like I always think about it as like an artist. I'm an instrument, so I would like someone to play me, like literally play me, but play me with respect and like use me wisely. You know what I mean? So this is how I think about it at the moment.
Thank you both for that. And I think, you know, this idea of collaborating and systems of hierarchy that are assumed, power dynamics that are assumed, that exist. I mean, they're real. There's real hierarchy, and there's this like chain. It usually goes up to the money and who has the decision-making powers. I wish I had it on easily on hand, and I might have it to show in a moment, but there is a fabulous diagram that my dear friend and fellow Wingspace member Marika Kent has found that we use sometimes in an exercise that shows like a flow of hierarchy that starts with like the producer and then the director writers and then sort of like splits off to the actors and designers, and then and it's a very clear structure. And so something that we like to do is to complicate that, right? And think about, you know, that's just one form of creating work, this hierarchical way of creating. And so my question to you all is like, what other structures are there? Like, what is your like ideal collaborative structure? I know for me personally, I like to create in sort of like a decolonized space where there is shared leadership and intentionality and reciprocity, and that can look and manifest in many different ways, but it's unique to every single project and process and story. So I'm curious about the spaces and structures that allow you to be your fullest self.
I can go if you want. Yeah. To me, it's like I share the feeling with you, Kate. I feel like I like to come like a team, like in a room. These are the people in the room that are gonna cook together. Now, what are the tools that each one has, and how can we share the resources and make a project? But I think this is a little bit like, this is the question that I've always asked myself. Like in theater, there is a specific story and there's a vision. And if not everyone in the team has the vision, understands the vision, then someone has to drive the ship in a way, you know what I mean? So I did not find a solution because I feel like we need to try use the system what you have, this hierarchical. It is there to protect us, because this is how we can go back into it and it will work out. But I feel like, how can we find different ways of creating where it doesn't have to be like production designer, set designer. It could be like design team. This is a team, and they come as a team and they say, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I do not necessarily think as well, like in the theater that I envision myself, I don't think there's a director. There's a guide to guiding all these people in the room. But as well, there's a map in a way that they all follow. So I think to move from like this system to the other, it's gonna be a little bit like a shock. It's like too much, I think, you know what I mean? So I feel like there should be a way of just mutating what we have and starting experimenting in these spaces, and then we see where we go. And this is how I think about it at the moment.
Yeah, I kind of, I agree with you both that there's always a vision. I think it becomes dangerous when among the team members, someone just cannot understand the vision. and they get neglected, or they're being told that this is just a vision, just go and do it or design it or bring back the product, instead of like having a conversation and understanding why that person is not understanding that vision, or they cannot agree with that vision. So it's kind of like in the middle ground between what Kate you were saying and what Maamoun you were saying for me. And it goes back to that discussion and conversation and getting everybody on the same page, and then let people do what they are good at doing, like do not interfere. I have worked with directors that they have a start with, oh, I used to be a costume designer. And I'm always like scared because I'm just like, okay, so are you gonna design it, or are you gonna let me design it? And sometimes it has turned out to be that person is gonna design the costume and I'm just gonna render their ideas. And that's kind of like a hierarchy that we're talking about, instead of like having a conversation and sharing a vision and ideas. So for me, the ideal situation is just having like a civil conversation about the story or the overarching vision of the show.
I just want to amplify that also, this idea of like trust people when they like come into the room, and like creating a space where that trust is like known. I'm just going to say, for like, I've worked with Kate Heaney a couple of times, and I feel infinite trust from her about like my skills and what did I just freeze? And my abilities as a collaborator, and that I will do something that is in line and serves the story and the process. And like that, feeling that trust from your collaborator, it just makes me personally like want to do, like to meet that expectation, that trust in the fullest way possible. Yeah, I don't know. I'm handing it over to you, Kate.
Yeah, I think that really resonates for me too. The idea of trust as sort of the foundational thing upon which everything else in a process can rest. I'd be curious to know also from both of you, because I think this question about sort of structures of working and hierarchy and power, I think also is really specific to the like type of theater that we make. You know, I think it's different if we're working on a play versus if we're, you know, is it a film, is it a multimedia? And so I'd be curious for both of you if there are certain media or genres or styles that you feel like lends itself more to the way that you're interested in working, or if you found ways to sort of find that regardless of the media or genre.
Well, I can jump on. Regarding the genre, I think I'm well known among those who are close to me that I just cannot understand musicals. Like the format is just, I mean, I designed them. It's just that deep, like kind of, you know, relationship that you're gonna have with the plays. For me, it's not gonna happen with musicals. And it's just coming from my background that theater is always like this political statement, and people say things that they cannot say, you know, in like real life. So it's just a cultural thing for me. But you know, it's just I look at each experience as something that I can learn from, and maybe I can say something that can add to that story and to that experience for everybody else. So this is how I walk into the space, regardless of the genre. And I'm just trying to like create like a good working relationship with everybody in the room, because I think that's something that is gonna stay well beyond the strike, and people, they're gonna remember those. So yeah, that's how I go into space.
Before I respond to the question, I just want to add to the trust thing that I am, just because I'm coming from, like I'm now coming into the world of the theater in the US. So I'm like a stranger coming in. So I feel, and I have many friends that have the same experience. It's not just me. And I feel from that experience, other than the trust, like, yes, I want, like we need the trust to be trusted in us and what we have to offer. But as well, this is a message for the people who sits in my place, is take responsibility, is own the trust that you're given. And like, as you said, Kate, it's like, it gives the motivation to do more. And this is where I think it's like, own your role within that equation. So yeah, this is what I wanted to say about trust. Then jumping to the other question is like, I feel like if my role is defined within in a context, I know that this is what I have to offer to the space. So I always come with like, give me my definition, tell me where is my boundaries, and I'm gonna stick to the boundaries, and I'm gonna perfectionize the boundary. You know, it's like, okay, your role is, let's say, doing the scenic design. Okay, so I'm gonna focus on the scenic design of the story. The power dynamic is just when I feel, and this is mostly, I feel it when I'm assisting, to be honest with you. I feel it when I'm assisting with directors. It's very few experience that I had this, but I had it when I was more forcing my vision upon the project. So I do not blame the other on that. Now that I understood, like, no, it's the story. It's not about what you think about the story. I changed my perspective about that. So this is where I feel like the hierarchy is always going to be there. We cannot remove it, but I think we do not have to act from that space. We can act from the spaces like, oh, the hierarchy is there to protect the project. And now let's go back into like, we're all equal and we're all like in the space of creative space, and let's see what happens. And if there's any conflict, because conflicts happen, this is when we go back into the structure to make the decision. And this is how I think about it at the moment.
Yes, I hear you. And I also believe that power dynamics will always exist. And I think that folks can come together intentionally and create in a way that does not reinforce hierarchy. But I appreciate your perspective also. And I appreciate the introduction of dissent always is welcome. So I appreciate that. And also inviting a response to that. But also, I just wanted to say that I agree.
I hope so. I think having like, I think I appreciate that you're saying that, to be honest with you, because I do not want that. Like, this is like so interesting, because I used to think about dominant and dominated. Now I think about protector and surrenderer. So I'm trying to change the vocab in my head. It's like, okay, instead of saying who's dominating, is like, no, who's holding the space and who's surrendering to the space. So for me, this different energies will always exist. Who's more holding and who's more like surrendering. And I think this dynamic will always prevail, even if we change the wording of it. You know what I mean? Even if we change the social structure about it. I don't know, please tell me I'm wrong. Like, yes, I was trying to know that, but this is where my brain is trying to.
I think it's everybody's individual experience personally. And I also appreciate the introducing of like shifting perspective based on the words that are being used. And I like to be in spaces where we can hold it together, but sometimes some people can take on more of that care than others. So knowing that that's always fluctuating. And yeah, I just want to, so Anna, I'm just going to say to everybody that is here, if you have any questions, please raise your hand or post it in the chat. I see Anna, I would love to invite you to voice your question or turn on your video.
Yeah, sure. I'll do that. First off, this is a great discussion. Thank you all so much for participating. I'm opening up this question to panelists and moderators, and I hope I worded it correctly, and I hope I'm not going off on too much of a tangent. But there's been, I think the most repeated word tonight has been space. But interesting, because in some ways I feel as if it's more speaking space in an abstract sense. And I'm actually curious, as designers and artists, our relationship with space in a concrete sense. And within the American Theater Institution, it's a lot of tied into the buildings and into those spaces and performance spaces. So I'm wondering this in terms of your identity, as well as in terms of designing, what is your relationship and also your experiences in conventional versus unconventional spaces and the communities tied to them?
Anna, do you want to go?
I just need to think about this question for like, you know.
Such a good question.
I was just typing that this is a great question.
I want some clarification, actually. So are you asking about what is the relationship, what is our individual relationship with this concrete space of theater?
The building. Like when we're thinking about it's like, because like if you think about it, theatrical institutions and the audiences that go to them are quite often tied to the building themselves. And if you change buildings and spaces, you also change audiences. So I'm wondering about your feelings towards that and towards creating for different spaces.
I personally think that when I think like an architect, I think always about like, okay, we have the theater that is proscenium based, and we have the open space black box that we can shape it. As a set designer, I can work with everything because it's shaping concrete space. It's like I create small words within any kind of configuration. I can adopt myself to any space. Now, when I speak with the voice of the theater artist, I think about theater the traditional way, proscenium based and building. I think about like these audience are witnesses, passive witnesses of an event that is offered by this community and a group of people to this community. Now, how can we change that and make the audience become an active witness, so they can add to the story and the storytelling? But this is a big question, because then you go back into redefining the theater architecture and redefining the properties of an event in the theater. So I think my relationship with this question is that, what scale are we talking on? Like, what voice are we talking on? Are we talking from being the designer? I can design any space. I can, and it's gonna affect the audience that will be in that event. But now I cannot determine, how do you say, like I cannot base my creation on who's coming. I personally cannot do that, because I think it's like as if I'm thinking about who's gonna eat my food. And to me, it's like I'm making the food for everyone. Whoever, I'm not making it for a specific, unless the story is for a specific culture. You know what I mean? It's like, so it depends on the context in a way. Like there's no general rule for that.
So I'm gonna try to answer that question. It's such a great question, and I think I need to think about it more. But even like with a space that I design quite frequently, my experience has been different. And it's not because of the space, it's because of the people that just shape the experience of being in that space. Sometimes I have been super comfortable and to express myself. And sometimes I just, was staring at my watch and I was, waiting to be done so I can run away and never come back to that space. But definitely there are, I used to work in a theater in Kansas City that was specifically produced show, and still they're doing it and they're great for African-American people in Kansas City. And the intimacy of audiences to what was happening on stage was just fascinating. It was something that I had never experienced anywhere else. And, when you were in the audiences, you were like within this community, and it was like everybody are trying to have conversation. And they were like, you would feel like so at home with that theater that I never ever felt it somewhere else. So, and some shows were different, every night was different. So I think it really depends on who is in that space and how they're treating each other, because that can shape the experience differently. I'm not sure if I responded to your question, but that was my best try for now.
No,
I just want to jump in fast, if I may, just to respond to Rana about. I do as a designer, I do believe that what gives a life to the set or like to the experience is the audience and how the audience experience the creation. However, I think that I think it's important when we design, at least for me, what is important when I design is that what the audience will leave with, not come to see, or how would they experience the event. It's more as if like, what am I doing and what they're gonna taste and they're gonna leave with. I don't think usually with it as like a story, like a text. I think always about it as like a feeling or a thought, internal experience. So this is what I just came to me when you were talking, and I wanted to share that.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you both.
yeah, go ahead. I was going to say thank you so much for answering.
Yeah, thank you both so much. And I think that, yeah, the responses really resonated with me. I've been thinking a lot during this time about the way that we experience theater with other humans, especially in this time of sort of, I mean, to a lesser extent now, but in terms of social distancing. And I've been in a few spaces recently where the lobbies have not been open to the fullest extent, and the process of sort of seeing a show and then having to like exit the space in order to have conversations about it, I think has been interesting and challenging. Anyway, I'm curious if there are any other questions that folks have from the audience. Feel free to raise your hand if so. If not, I will turn it over to Kate for our final question.
Why, thank you, Kate. Many Kates in the space today.
Many Kates.
Yeah, so once again, yeah, I also like very fully resonate with that, and creating to a specific space and individual audience. Even these virtual spaces are specific space, so creating experiences, considering that space and considering how it's being utilized, like how it's being experienced, and then what happens afterwards. Is a beautiful way to just think about every individual opportunity. So with that, and I would ask the two of you, again, as we are wrapping up this very rich conversation, thank you so much for everything that you've offered. To offer one more thing, a charge or a question to to your collaborators, to people making theater in the United States and beyond, to the audiences, what is something that you would ask of all of us if you had an audience that was all ears?
Another like difficult question to come up with a question. Sometimes just asking the right question is, is a huge task. So I'm gonna think about it for a couple of seconds.
Just saying that I very much appreciate that in general, like pushing up against the idea. Sorry, I'm echoing back in my, pushing back against the idea that we all have to have the answer immediately. That's a big thing for me, especially as a designer, to like know the answer. And I know that that has been said a couple of times in this space. So like, thank you for even modeling that.
I don't think I have a question. Oh no, it's a question. Whatever. No, I do have a question actually. I'm like, I ask myself, like, this is what I ask myself. It's like, what are we doing? You know what I mean? I feel personally that there's a coping mechanism that we're all going through, trying to find solutions. But I think at least for me, I did not feel yet I'm in spaces where I found this common path, let's say. Like, okay, we're working on theater, but what are we working for? Like, we're trying to diversify. We're trying to do, okay, but why are we doing this? What is the aim? Like, once we have diversified theater, what is next? So in a way, like, I always think like in a strategy way. It's like, okay, we're going through these steps that we're doing, but what is the spine of the project that we're creating? You know, so I think about it like a process. Like, I'm doing a model. And my question is that I think is like, do we have a common understanding of where we want to go, or what direction are we going? Like, is there a direction, or are we just reactive to what's happening? So this is my question, maybe. Yeah, I think so.
Well, I think I was thinking about what kind of a question I want to ask. And I think part of the reason that I'm having a hard time coming up with that one question is just because it's very, the questions that we ask are very like particular to the moment that we are in, and what we are trying to achieve. Like pre-COVID, we had different sets of questions during COVID. And right now it's like, we are just trying to, get back to the theater. Are we trying to entertain, to just, forget about everything that we went through, or going back to what Maamoun said, like what we are trying to do. And I think always, maybe for me, going into theater productions, sitting, watching what is happening on stages, whose voices have been granted a space on the stage, and for what reason. So I think that's very important for me, like whose voices we are trying to amplify. I think that's central to my own experience, to whatever theater productions that I go. So yeah, I think that's maybe a question for myself rather than for everybody else. And I can only talk about my own experience, answering to this very difficult question.
Those are great answers. Thank you both so much. And thank you, Kate, for holding this space with me. And thank you to all of the other Wingspace supporters who have helped to hold this space as well. And thank you to everybody who has joined in here and also on Facebook. I appreciate you. I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate all of these charges. And before we sign off, I just wanted to uplift next Thursday, we have another salon that is happening, and I'll put up the flyer for that right after this. It is our virtual salon number 33. I can't believe we're at 33. It's our Women of Color Designers feature series, and we're featuring set designers next week. So please tune in Thursday, November 18th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific via Zoom and Facebook. And if you feel so moved to do so, feel free to find a way to make a donation to Wingspace to continue supporting these amazing conversations and these amazing artists who give of themselves to join us here in these deep conversations. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Wingspace for hosting this.